In this presentation, we'll address a profound question. How did meaning emerge in our universe? Now, what do we mean by meaning? Well, if you look in the dictionary, it says something like what is intended to be or actually is, expressed or indicated, signification. And a second entry would be the end, purpose, or significance of something. So our question is, how did meaning emerge in the universe? Well, let's take a step back and map out the course of the universe over time, from the origins that we call the Big Bang till today. Now we'll notice early in the universe then, we have things like particles and atoms and stars and supernova and nebula and planets. And here we see some pictures associated with those objects. So we have energy and objects, but these things don't have meaning as we typically understand it. They simply exist. But then something curious happened. Around 4 billion years ago on planet Earth, things with purpose emerge in the universe, and we call them living things. All living things on planet Earth have parts with purpose. And where did these living things that have parts with purpose come from? And the answer, following Darwin, is natural selection. And that's why natural selection is such an important natural phenomenon. It is a process that generates organisms that have parts with purposes. And the purpose is generally to promote survival and reproduction. But it's not until the evolution of creatures like us, Homo sapiens, where we find creatures seeking meaning. So we do have a story to tell, how we go from a universe that just had energy and objects, no meaning present, intrinsically present in these objects, to the origin of life, and now we have purpose emerging in the universe, until today we have creatures that seek meaning. And so in the last 4 billion years of Earth's history, we have the origin of life. These are cellular organisms. We have natural selection causing these cells to evolve into different types of cells. And we have the emergence of large complex cells that have a nucleus and mitochondria. And then we have multi-celled organisms like animals and plants. And then we have creatures, species with big brains like us. Meaning emerged with the evolution of brains, especially sophisticated brains like ours. So at a first pass, human brains create meanings. That's where meaning emerged in our universe. In the rest of this presentation, I'll be borrowing ideas from this book here, Until the End of Time, written by Brian Greene, a physicist. The subtitle, Mind, Matter, and Our Search for Meaning in an Evolving Universe. So here we have a physicist sort of mapping out the emergence of meaning in the universe. Now, being a physicist, of course, he's very familiar with sort of the way physicists describe the fundamental nature of reality. And here we have a little picture over here. At a fundamental level, the universe consists of quantum fields, with particles being excitations of those fields. So in science class, we learn about these basic particles that make up atoms, electrons and protons and neutrons and so on. Well, for physicists, these particles are not the basic fundamental level of reality. Rather, particles are just excitations in these quantum fields. Now, we're not going to go into the physics of that, but we want to have this picture as the basic reality of our universe. Fields that can generate particles. So, news alert. Meaning is something that these particles can produce, given enough time to organize in the appropriate ways. So we don't see any meaning at this level of fundamental reality. But you get these particles arranged in certain ways, and out of that arrangement, meaning can emerge. So here we see a rocky planet like Earth. All material things are composed of particles. But a planet like this is a non-living object. A rock is non-living. But this thing over here, that's an amoeba eating a paramecium. Right? In the history of the universe, some particles arrange themselves in a special way, taking a different path through time. So this is a living organism, but still composed of these basic particles or excitations of quantum fields. Now, being a living organism, here's where natural selection comes into play. And so living things have the capacity to change over time. Natural selection promotes survival and reproduction and generates parts with purpose. For example, the proteins that govern the deployment of pseudopods, the purpose of those proteins is to capture prey. And there's other proteins whose purpose is to digest the prey, etc. And here's a quote from Green. "What life can do is facilitate groups of particles to act in concert and manifest collective behaviors that, compared to the inanimate world, are novel." So there's just a lot of interesting things going on in the world of life that are not happening in the non-living realm. And then, over evolutionary time, we have the emergence of animals with brains. So notice at the bottom here, of course, animals with brains are also composed of particles. So everything in the universe will be composed of particles and fields. But now we have, with brains, the emergence of minds. And the word mind kind of refers to just our psychological experience of our own brains. Basically, we're aware of what our brains are doing, but the brain is a physical organ, and our mind is our sort of subjective experience of what the brain is doing. But it's with the emergence of brains that we have living things that are, in a sense, metaphorically asking the question, how best to survive? There might be several options, and the brain is going to decide one course of action over another. So what do brains do? What can they do? Larger, more complex brains can form memories, analyze situations, use memories to make decisions, flexibly generate adaptive behavior. In the case of our own evolution, in the evolution of our hands, for example, with dexterous fingers and a strong opposable thumb, humans began changing the world to suit our desires. And of course, our desires spring forth from our brains. So the human organism is a powerful organism on planet Earth. It's got a big brain as well as these hands capable of modifying the world according to our desires. So let's take a moment to quickly recap some key aspects of our own evolution. There are several large-brained apes on planet Earth today. We have orangutans and gorillas and chimps and bonobos. But of course, it's our species. We became a cultural species. We are notable in many ways for our intelligence, our language, our cultural prowess. Our journey could be summarized quickly like this. Our distant ancestors were tree-dwelling ape ancestors, and then creatures like Lucy, ground-dwelling bipedal apes with small brains. And then we have creatures like Homo habilis and Homo erectus, cooperative, group-living, larger-brained, tool-using, cultural ancestors. And that brings us to modern times. Culturally dependent, language-using, collective learners and teachers, large-brained, conscious, modern humans. And if we sort of draw out some of the key features of our evolution, both physical and social, the key to our story is that new and changing environments challenged our ancestors to rely heavily on culture to survive. Our ancestors crossed a Rubicon that no other species has managed to do. We became a cultural species. So at the top of this drawing here, we have an ape ancestor, and some 6 million years ago, that common ancestor split into the ancestors of today's chimps and our ancestors. So we have physical changes here. We have bipedalism emerging here. We also had to evolve new social relations in our species to deal with this new physical environment. Along the way, our brains were increasing in size, and we began using language. So our particular history was one in which our species, to meet the new demands of our new environment, we had to rely on cultural knowledge to survive, and that favored the evolution of bigger brains. So our ancestors evolved in a physical and social environment that selected for larger brains to acquire, use, and share new cultural knowledge. Language was a species-defining capacity that evolved as an adaptation for succeeding in a complex social system characterized by cultural learning and interdependent lifestyle. And by interdependent, it means at first our ancestors had to cooperate to maybe do some scavenging out in the woodlands or the grasslands, but then we became hunting. And this kind of social organization requires high degrees of cooperation. So we were dependent upon each other to carry out certain tasks so the whole group could survive. Of course, the emergence of language became a huge advantage in organizing these complex social affairs in our ancestors. In time, of course, competition with other human groups became formative in our evolutionary history as well. But many people, upon reflection, would identify language as being especially important for our species. We, unlike any animal on Earth, have a disposition to communicate cooperatively. We have a readiness for this complex thing we call language that other large-brained apes just don't seem to have. Now let's use this diagram here to figure out where meaning emerges in our language. Well, let's start at the top right here. Here we have an object in the world, a tiger. Now, as we interact with the tiger, we're going to learn what it looks like and what it sounds like and what it eats and where it lives, etc. We're going to experience the object's characteristics, and our brain is going to learn about those characteristics and make a set of memory traces that are all connected. We call that the concept of a tiger in our brain. Now, in linguistic creatures like us, what we go on to do is we associate an arbitrary sound to that concept. And we call that thing a word. So this is how a word can mean an object. So words refer to, stand for, signify objects in the world. The objects are represented in our brain in the form of concepts, and they originate from our experience of the world or somebody teaching us about the world, teaching us new concepts. And because we have this sound linked to the concept, then when we utter that sound, we can transmit the associated meaning. Of course, for communication to be efficient and helpful, all the members of the group have to agree upon the meanings of words. Now, language is a bridge between minds. If we look at the cartoon here, we have the individual on the left. They're having a thought, and they're going to translate that thought into a series of sounds. They make those sounds, and then, amazingly, the other person hears those sounds and generates a meaning, and there is understanding. So we might say it like this: our ancestors discovered ways to link their minds and then evolved brains to enhance that ability. In other words, in the beginning there might have been these sort of crude attempts to establish some kind of communication, but over evolutionary time, natural selection favored modification in brains to make that communication more efficient. And so that's why we have this apparently genetic readiness for language. And with this language, it created a capacity for collective learning unmatched in the animal kingdom. So the fact that we can communicate our thoughts and share them with another, it means that our single brain can, in a sense, be the host of lots of ideas that come from other brains. So each brain can store the wisdom of many other brains. And this is a powerful development in evolutionary history on planet Earth. We have a species that is literally able to connect their brains to solve the problems of life. Now let's return to our diagram. So here we have the emergence of mind in the universe. And now we're going to add that this mind possesses the capacity for language. With language, the entire universe could be the target of our linguistic creations. We used creativity and imagination to shape words to express our longings and frustrations, confusions and revelations, failures and triumphs. We could explore the universe with body and mind, reason and emotion. With words, we explored outer and inner space with greater power and precision. So, of course, our senses gives us information about the outer world, and we used our language to describe those things and categorize those things. But we could also turn our language inward, so we could begin to map out the contents of our own minds. We noticed, described, and categorized our own mental states and learned to share the results of our introspection. However, to know about our mental states and decide what we wanted to say about them, we had to be conscious of our own minds. And here we get to this other fascinating feature of our human lives, that we are conscious. So what is the value of consciousness? Well, this is a hotly debated question in neuroscience, but here's one approach. Consciousness serves a social cultural function to promote social cooperation and coordination. Consciousness allowed for language-using apes to know their own minds and connect with the minds of others. You see, we wouldn't need this consciousness if we didn't need to talk with others about current thoughts, projects, memories, etc. We can't tell each other what we are thinking unless we ourselves are aware of what we are thinking. So in this view, consciousness served a social function. It allowed us, along with our language, to establish greater levels of group coordination. So as our social and cultural life became more and more complex over evolutionary time, there was a greater need for and value of consciousness. We had to be conscious of our own thoughts and feelings to be able to use them to model the minds of others and regulate what we said and did in the group. So now we're going to note this little curious eyeball that's turned inward. That's going to be our icon for our capacity for introspection. An inner world comes into view, reportable in language. That's our consciousness, our self-awareness. Returning to language, with words, we can also explore time. We can step outside of time to think about the past and imagine the future. And here's another Brian Greene quote. With the emergence of the human species, one self-aware species rises above the needs of the moment to see itself as part of an unfolding from past to future. Notice these kinds of life forms are tied to immediate events in the here and now. They cannot elevate themselves above the present. They can't ponder the future and reflect on the past. Also notable in our species is our sort of moral capacity. We perceive ourselves to have free will. Brains give living things more options in responding to the world compared to non-living objects, but always in accordance with the laws of nature. Over here, with non-living things, particles lacking life and mind have fewer possible futures within the constraints imposed by the laws of nature. So with the emergence of minds equipped with language and consciousness, we have a creature that perceives itself to have options. So whatever's happening in the world, this kind of creature with this kind of capacity, it has a sense that it could do this or could do that. And that kind of sense of agency is what we mean by free will. We perceive ourselves to be the captain of our own ship. We have agency. We have choices to act in one way or another. We can imagine that others could have acted differently in the past to create a different present. We use language to create moral rules and obligations. Our moral judgments are some of the things that particles can do when they arrange into life with a conscious and linguistic mind. So at this stage then, with a species that's using language, we have the emergence of meaning. Language traffics in meaning. Words have meaning. So with the emergence of language, we have the emergence of meaning in the universe. And so this will be our last character in our drawing. We have an organism now that doesn't just use words that have meaning. This kind of creature is searching for meaning for their own lives. Here's a Green quote. "Winning the battle is no longer the only concern. We are no longer satisfied to merely survive. We want to know why survival is significant. We seek context. We search for relevance. We assign value. We judge behavior. We pursue meaning." And so now we have our final sort of addition on the bottom part of the diagram here. We have everything's made of particles and fields. We have the emergence of mind in the universe, right? Trying to figure out how best to survive, making decisions and so on. And now we have the emergence of meaning. And at the heart of that is this question, why is survival significant? Green goes on. And so we develop explanations of how the universe came to be and how it might end. We tell and retell stories of minds making their way through worlds, real and fanciful. We imagine realms populated by departed ancestors or semi-powerful or all-powerful beings that reduce death to a stepping stone in an ongoing existence. We paint and carve and etch and sing and dance to touch these other realms, or to pay homage to them, or simply to imprint the future with something that attests to our brief time in the sun. So we humans are conscious and curious, intelligent and creative. Here we see the development of the brain from infant to adult. And what do we do with our brains? Well, we can build technologies like this radio telescope, and we can explore the vast universe. And we can share the excitement of our discoveries because we have language. And think of the linguistic concepts that we had to come up with to explain this kind of beautiful spectacle in nature. But with that language, in a quiet moment, we ask these big questions. Does life have meaning? Does a human life signify anything? Well, Shakespeare had an answer in one of his plays. Life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. For many, religions around the world help people find meaning in their own lives. For religious thinkers, there can be an answer to the question, is there a purpose to the universe? Right? Why does the whole universe exist? Does our universe have a purpose? To someone or for something? Are we supposed to be something or do something to please or satisfy a creator of this universe? We debate. Perhaps in the Andromeda Galaxy there are other life forms wondering the same thing. Science raises the challenging possibility that we live in a universe that made us, but was not made for us. After all, there was a time when we were at the center of it all, with the Earth the center of our solar system. Until we weren't, and Copernicus gets it right. There was a time in biology when people thought we were put into this world by a loving, all-powerful being. Or perhaps not, following in Darwin's footsteps. There was a time when our galactic neighborhood was the only one. Until it wasn't, with the discoveries of Edwin Hubble. Our Milky Way galaxy is just one of hundreds of billions, perhaps trillions. And this picture is from the James Webb Space Telescope, showing some 50,000 galaxies in a small patch of sky. It's our kind of brain that made this kind of telescope, and it allows us to study the farthest reaches of the universe. So obviously many galaxies were invited to the party that is our universe. Perhaps we are not the center of it all. For some, it is easy to think that our world has no significance. It's just a tiny rock in a vast galaxy, one among a trillion others. But our tiny rock produced life forms that can think and create meaning. In this view, there is no meaning that is built into the universe. We must make our lives significant in our own way. And the clock is ticking. There exists a nagging concern of beings aware of their own mortality, that we will eventually dissolve back into the fabric of reality. Consider a quote from Kierkegaard. What does it mean to be a self-conscious animal? The idea is ludicrous if it is not monstrous. It means to know that one is food for worms. This is the terror, to have emerged from nothing, to have a name, consciousness of self, deep inner feelings, and excruciating inner yearning for life and self-expression, and with all this, yet to die. Here's a quote from Green. The fact that we will all die, and the fact that the human species will die, and the fact that life and mind, at least in this universe, are virtually certain to die, are expected, run-of-the-mill, long-term outcomes of physical law. The only novelty is that we notice. And these kinds of creatures don't notice it. Value and meaning, decidedly absent from the bedrock of reality, become intrinsic to a restless urge that elevates us above indifferent nature. So there's no value or meaning in particles and quantum fields. We enjoy that realm of existence. We are elevated above indifferent nature because of this restless urge to seek meaning. How utterly wondrous it is that a small collection of the universe's particles can rise up, examine themselves and the reality they inhabit, determine just how transitory they are, and with a flitting burst of activity, create beauty, establish connection, and illuminate mystery. Most of us allow civilization to shield us from the realization that we are part of a world that, when we're gone, will hum along, barely missing a beat. We focus our energy on what we can control. We build community. We participate. We care. We laugh. We cherish. We comfort. We grieve. We love. We celebrate. We consecrate. We regret. We thrill to achievement, sometimes our own, sometimes of those we respect or idolize. Through it all, we grow accustomed to looking out to the world to find something to excite or soothe, to hold our attention or whisk us to someplace new. Yet, the discoveries of science suggest strongly that the universe does not exist to provide an arena for life and mind to flourish. Life and mind are simply a couple of things that happen to happen until they don't. Looking for the universe to hug us, its transient, conscious squatters, is understandable, but that's just not what the universe does. We exist because our specific particular arrangements won the battle against an astounding assortment of other arrangements, all vying to be realized. By the grace of random chance, funneled through nature's laws, we are here. As we hurtle toward a cold and barren cosmos, we must accept that there is no grand design. Particles are not endowed with purpose. There is no final answer hovering in the depths of space awaiting discovery. Instead, certain special collections of particles can think and feel and reflect, and within these subjective worlds, they can create purpose. And so, in our quest to fathom the human condition, the only direction to look is inward. That is the noble direction to look. It is a direction that forgoes ready-made answers and turns to the highly personal journey of constructing our own meaning. It is a direction that leads to the very heart of creative expression and the source of our most resonant narratives. Science is a powerful, exquisite tool for grasping an external reality. But within that rubric, within that understanding, everything else is the human species contemplating itself, grasping what it needs to carry on, and telling a story that reverberates into the darkness, a story carved of sound and etched into silence, a story that, at its best, stirs the soul. So for a long stretch of the history of the universe, things existed, not minds nor meaning. And then life emerged, and brains evolved. Now, intelligent and self-aware minds exist, seeking meaning. A tiny part of the universe can contemplate the entire universe. Our limited time on Earth invites the profound question, what is the point of it all? Well, one answer is the following. We make our world significant by the courage of our questions and the depth of our answers. And if we can use our intellect and our technology to do this and do it well, then we will make true the following thought. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself. So our talented brains give us great opportunities. With consciousness, we can be a witness to the grandeur of our universe. With intelligence and language, we can honor our universe by learning about it and sharing our discoveries with others. And with the knowledge of our own mortality, we can better appreciate the chance we have to exist in our home, this awesome universe. And with this presentation, let's give a special thanks to the laws of nature, which brought us all into existence and gave us a brief moment on this immense stage to enjoy our time together. And hopefully figure out what the hell is going on.